Well, I'm Scott Weicht, and I went with a group of 24 of us, and we were hiking the Scottish trail called the West Highland Way back in September of 2019. And this is the first time I've been working with the PowerPoint here with a full presentation. And so I'm going to have to bear with me here if I've got questions or things to actually walk through or see. And what let's see, Adam, can you hear me just fine from Midwest Mountaineering?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we're live and I'm going, eh? Okay. So what we did is it was September of 2019, and here we were at the beginning of it. And we started the West Highland Way as a little background or backdrop, is that it was started to get created back in the 1960s. And it was the first full hiking trail that was created through Scotland or in Scotland. It was opened in 1980, and in total it's about 96 miles. And it's a very well-known hiking trail. There's about 36,000 people that hike this each year. So you have to do a little bit of planning to consider just when and where you're going to be staying and the time of year and what. And it's very interesting that in Scotland, you have a situation where you can walk and hike across private property. And so that's rather interesting to actually be able to really be a part of it as well. And I just got a note here that said, turn up my mic. So I'll see if I can figure out how to do that. And looking here, if I'm able to, boy, can't really see just how to turn my mic up any more than what I have already. But I'll just try to talk a little bit louder here. How's that? See if that helps. And so the hike started just outside of Glasgow, Scotland. And there we go. A little bit more background here then. You can see the hike itself actually starts in Glasgow, and then it follows and goes north, ends up in Fort William, and it covers quite a bit of diverse terrain. And you can see here's on the left-hand side of what you're seeing, a bit of a map as well. And I'll be referring to a number of these little towns as we go, but you can see the red line. We're going to be going along the Kinlockleven, which was a very deep lake and large lake. And then it heads up further then through the moors of Scotland. And we'll finish up then in, as I had mentioned, in Fort William. And that's interesting. I just lost my, there it is. Lost my control. Okay. All right. So what we did was we were a group of 24, and there's a number of different times that you can go, and you can, the speed of the hikes as well. What we did is we wanted to go, and there was two groups of us actually. We split up because some of us were not quite looking at doing the full 96 miles. So we had a subset of us that did a 68-mile hike, and then the remainder of the group did the 96. So I'll be talking about the 96 mile, which is what I had done, along with a group of 12 others. So there's 13 of us, and then 11 of us then met at different times as we were moving along. And so we started in the little town of in Glasgow, and then we went to Milgai, they pronounce it, took a train up there. And then you'll see that these are the towns we stayed in each night, and that's the distances and the walk in miles. So you can see that it was the longest day was the day we hiked to Kingshouse. You can see down at the bottom, then you can see the actual elevation changes. So we started out going from the south to north, so it was a little easier to start with. And then it got a little bit more rugged and a bit more climb as the time went on here, as the trip went on. But again, wouldn't say that any of it was extremely strenuous. It was something that you could actually do with reasonable health and good pair of walking shoes. Weather-wise, we went in September, and it's wet no matter what time of the year you go. Unbelievably, we hit in the entire 7 days, 7 nights, 8 days. It was incredible that we only had a few hours of just a misty rain for 2 of the days. Otherwise, it was absolutely spectacularly clear, which even the locals were telling us was really just amazing and not really something that was normal. So you can see that there's rain no matter what time of the year you end up going. So the first day we're on the way to Dreaman, they pronounce it, or Drummond, and you're going to be crossing lots of fences. So there's lots of fences and lots of gates and every type of gate design you can imagine. And it was something that was really of interest just to see, just with all of the old hedgerows, the stone hedges, and then the gates that you'd be going through. You can see the trail itself was actually nicely paved with gravel, and it overall was really quite a enjoyable walk the entire time. This first day, we actually in the distance here, those of you that are Harry Potter fans, this is where Hagrid, Robbie Coltrane, that's his place up there on the hill. And just where we were standing and taking this photo, behind us was a distillery, Glengoyne distillery. So we went through a distillery tour as well, which was rather fun. You can't go to Scotland without seeing some of the distilleries and the whiskeys that they have. And then also you're going to find that as we go through the slides, you're going to see that I have a fair number of slides that have pictures of people, the fellow hikers and travelers I was with. And that helps give you a little perspective for both the size of the boulders and the rocks we were going through, or in the areas, and just the terrain as well. So there's a number of pictures here with people in it as well. That night we actually stayed in this little town of Dreaman. We actually stayed in a hotel, and every one of these hotels is 17th, 18th century type hotels. There was a little pub nearby that had the claim to fame that it was one of the oldest pubs in Scotland. And that was like in the early 1700s, if I remember right. But interestingly enough, you go into other towns as well, and they all seem to have a pub that was claimed to be one of the oldest in Scotland. I think that's something that people try to vie for there. The second day, we headed out the second morning with just a little bit of haze and a little bit of mist in the air. And our goal was to be at the town of Rowardannan. And don't mind if I can't pronounce these things. I'll tell you, the Scottish words and Scottish names are tough for me to pronounce. And we started then from the distance, we started seeing Loch Lomond. And Loch Lomond, it's the largest lake, or loch they call it there, in Britain, in Great Britain. It's over 600 feet deep. And another interesting thing is that amazingly, it provides about 450 million liters of water per day to some of the surrounding Scottish cities. And yet it doesn't drop in depth, or go down, the water level go down. And so we were hiking, starting to approach that and get to a point where we're going to be hiking that. We went over a number of hills that second day as well. And the terrain within the forests and woods were a lot of ferns and a lot of greenery. And then as you saw, it was a little bit windswept and wind blowing up on the hills themselves. And feel free, by the way, if you have questions, just send the questions into the chat. And there's a little bit of a lag, but I'll certainly work to answer questions as they come up here on this as well. I've got about 40 slides, and so we've got plenty of time for questions. Here was an idea of where we would be staying at night. We would stay at either little hotels or B&Bs. And one of the things that we found is that because this is so heavily traveled, and then also that we were a fairly good sized group, we actually worked with a travel, best word for it is a travel agency or a travel group to help us with the arrangements for the hotels where we were staying at night. Also, what's really nice is they have a luggage service that forwards luggage from one location to the next. And that was really a huge plus, so that we really only needed to carry day packs, and we would carry rain gear and plenty of water with us as well. But we didn't have to carry all of our gear because that could be forwarded to the next location, whether it be a bed and breakfast or a rather quaint hotel. And so that would be a recommended way to travel with something like this this trip and this location. It was just much more enjoyable. Although we did meet with people that were carrying everything on their packs as well, and there's opportunities for camping. Also, you don't have to stay in hotels or B&Bs as you go along. Day 3, we were heading out, and it was cool in the morning, but the temperatures actually got warm during the day. And you can see here we are along Lochs, and we're heading to the little town of Inverarnan. I can't pronounce it even, Inverarnan. And this was interesting because there was actually several different routes in some of the different days that you could take. In this day here, you started out and there was pretty much a decision pretty quickly whether you wanted to take what would be a high route or the lower route just along the lake or loch. And the lower route was much more rugged. Both of them were scenic though and beautiful. And so the group I was with, we took the lower route. And many of these routes that we're on were old sheep or cattle trails. So you can imagine that some of them were a bit rugged or rough, as I had mentioned, because they, at its heyday, the Scots were using this same trail and same hiking area to send through about 10,000 cattle a year or 100,000 sheep. One thing that we really found as well going through this whole area was that you always heard the sound of water. It was always waterfalls that you'd come by or creeks that you'd be crossing. Clearly, there's a lot of, with all the rain they get in Scotland, there's lots of waterfalls that you see. And somebody was asking what company did we use for helping us plan this. We ourselves used a firm by the name of Max Adventure. And there's a number of them that specialize with this trip. They did a great job for us. And we actually scheduled this approximately, because we were a big group, approximately 12 months before we went. And cost-wise, just in 2019 dollars, it was about $110 a night, all in. And that was the lodging, the breakfast, the transportation of our bags each day. And then also they would include or offer a lunch that you could, a bag lunch or a packed lunch as well. So you could actually get lunch packed and prepared for you. You just had to let them know the night before. So you can see, again, some of the, I mean, there's stone walls everywhere, just as you would imagine. And it was really fun to see just all of the moss growing and just all the greenery. And one interesting too is that while we didn't see a lot of deer, one thing you have to be cautious of is a bit like northern Minnesota are the deer ticks. And so that was something that was a surprise. I didn't expect they'd had deer ticks, and it was later in the season anyway. But a number of people ended up having deer ticks during the trip that they picked up along the trail in the grass. Another interesting thing along this hike is that they have what they call honesty shops. And there's a number of these just set up in little towns or by a farmhouse as you're going by. And they'll have water, or they'll have candy bars, or vegetables or fruit. Just something that the local farmer had as well for the crop. But you leave your pounds in the little red box in this case, and you can refresh yourself and have a nice cold soda or pop, or get a water to refill your water bottle. And they're honesty shops or honesty boxes, because nobody's actually manning them. They're just there as you walk by, which is kind of fun. Here's the walking along the Lochs, and you can see what I was describing as far as some of the rugged rock that we were going through in the trail. It was never really any I felt danger, and it was never extremely difficult. Although there were times when you'd have to scramble up just a little bit, or go back down. And again, it was just absolutely gorgeously colorful throughout all of this. Here's where we stayed then that night when we were at Inverarnan. And this is actually on the other side of Lochs. So you raised a little ball on I guess a flagpole is a good way to describe it, a little orange ball, and then there'd be a little ferry that would chug across and pick you up and take you about maybe 2-3 kilometers, probably 3-4 kilometers across the way to stay at this little hotel. So rather fun little way to finish the day, and just a beautiful location. Next morning, we were on the way to Tyndrum, and this is what we had for the stillness of the morning when we were leaving. Just a beautiful start of another day. And Tyndrum, that's when we were actually leaving the loch itself. So we were no longer going to be walking along the lake. So we started heading into the hills, and you can see the size of the trail here. And it was moving forward, and the terrain was starting to change a little bit now as well. It started opening up a bit. And this is also the day that this was about the halfway point of the hike as far as distance goes, about midday. You can see we're going to be walking by a farmstead up here, and the trail was always very easily marked, so there's really no issue. The guidebook we had, that I've got the name of it on at the end, or the authors, it was really extremely helpful. They have guidebooks that tell you each and every location and site, and what to look for on the right and the left, and trail markers, where you can reprovision. I mean, just every bit of information you could possibly imagine is available in some of the guidebooks. So that was really, really helpful. And Tyndrum itself was actually an old mining town. It's a bit like the Colorado mining towns up in the mountains. Is that it was lead mining back in the 1800s, and now of all things, there's actually a gold mining that they're doing there. But yet it's still a quaint little place. Another thing too that you have along the way, there were a number of what they called bothies. And bothies are a place that you can spend the evening or spend the night to get out of the rain. You don't have to camp then, and they're free to whoever is there first. They could sleep anywhere from, the ones we saw, anywhere from 10, 12 people or more. And they're old sheep and cattle ranching shelters for the sheep herders that were taking care of the sheep at the time. And so you would find these from time to time or place to place, and they're always a little rustic. But I'll tell you what, if you needed to get out of the rain, it would be somewhere dry, and it would actually be very comfortable to spend the evening, I thought, in some of the bothies. So they're available as well for camping. And then you can see how the landscape is changing. Of course, you still got the ubiquitous fences and gates, but now it's becoming much more, in the distance, you can see the forests and the glens or the valleys, as well as the hills. And there's always fence crossings. There was every kind of fence crossing you can imagine, and then some different ones you couldn't actually even have pictured as well. So again, you're always crossing people's land throughout the day. Day 5 then was we were heading to the Kingshouse, and this is the longest day. This is about 20 miles, and this is also one of the days where, after about a third of the way in, that would be the last point in you were a place where you could actually pick a bus up or catch a hitchhike or however to actually get to the hotel Kingshouse. So you had to really plan on about a 14-mile hike with very little way to get out other than the same way you came in. And that also highlights that throughout this entire trip, if you really did have something happen, most of the time you would be able to go down to a freeway or a road and be able to find in some of the little towns bus stops and be able to go forward by bus as well. So the group that I was referring to, some of our group, they would jump ahead of us sometimes by bus, and then they would hit the trail and we'd all meet that night. Other nights they would be staying behind and would catch the bus then later in the day. So there's a lot of ways of traveling this hike and not just be concerned that you're not going to make the 96 miles. And Kingshouse itself is really interesting because it's a 1700s hotel that then has been substantially renovated. You can see what you're walking along here as well. And again, you notice that in this area here, it was actually really nice gravel that they had. And you notice how the train's opening up. It's very soft. Once you actually would step off the trail, you could see rock here from place to place, but it actually was boggy and soft as well. And you would find little streams going through, and it was kind of nice to be able to stop and take a break and kick the boots off, and very ice cold streams. That's one thing, make sure you have good hiking boots. I actually thought I had a good pair, but I ended up with blisters and pretty sore feet by the end of the trail, because it is definitely, it's rocky in locations and places, and you definitely need a good stiff soled boot. This is kind of fun. This is Ian Fleming's manor house of James Bond author fame. And we came up over the top of a hill, and here was a small loch, and this is his manor house there in the distance. Again, just absolutely gorgeous views and scenery. It's hard to believe that they had so much rain every year because we were in blue sky country. Here we are again walking that long day, and this highlights again, these are actually old military roads. These are roads that were built back in the early 1700s and primarily to the English military moving up and down because they had all the Scottish insurrections taking place and the unrest, the civil unrest. So, war created some of the trails that we were on. And then, no, you can't go hiking without something in the pack that you could share along the way. And my pack got lighter as each day went on because it seems like the whiskey just was disappearing a bit. But it was really fun. We would have just great whiskey tastings or Scotch tastings at night when we were wherever we were staying. It was really rather fun to taste all the different ones that were coming throughout the country itself. And then you also would see a lot of sheep. I saw some cattle, but mostly sheep. And then surprisingly, you just didn't see the deer that you always we would read about or hear that were everywhere. You saw the deer when you actually left Fort William and came back along the same trail or the same way by train. They were all just on the other side of the little hills, probably just laughing at us, staying out of the way of all us hikers. But there's plenty of deer there as well. Also, take a look. They really manage their forests. And we went through a number of areas that were getting clear cut. And so they've got forests that they're planting, and they're in every stage of their growth. And then also you'd see both in the distance and as we walk through areas where they're actually clear cutting and taking the forests out as well. They're very heavily managed and working hard to establish more forest areas throughout Scotland. So then we left then Kingshouse, and actually in that area was the glen called Glencoe, and you can see just why it's such a well-known mountaineering area. because here, this is the Devil's Staircase that we hit fairly soon after we left Glencoe, and we were on the way to Kinlockleven, and that was going to be our last stop before Fort William. And we saw these little yellow orange flags, and we weren't sure just what these flags were. Well, it turns out that in Kinlockleven, they have an annual, I guess I'd call it an endurance race. And wouldn't you know it, we were coming through just as they were doing this multi-day race, and it's really quite the endurance race. They've got one that's called what is it called? It's called the Ring of Steel, and they cover 5 peaks. It's 18 miles, and the times that they finish these in is over extremely rugged terrain. The times that these runners finish these in are just phenomenal. We were watching on the big screen when we got into Kinlockleven, and the winning men were coming in at like 3.25 hours, and the winning woman came in at like 3.5 hours. And this is 18 miles with over 8,000 vertical feet of climb on, like I said, extremely rocky, rugged trails. So they're known for this annual race that people come throughout the world to compete. I think the woman who won actually was from Alaska, if I remember right, with that day we were there. So here's what I was referring to. There's a lot of the bends or the mountains that we're walking through as we're walking through the valleys or the glens. And again, it's just absolutely gorgeous scenery and country. And you can see why people come for the mountaineering and the climbing as well. Here we are over the top of the Devil's Staircase coming over. And you can see here's the trail now that we're still going to be on as we walk through the valley and continue forward. And notice how the terrain has changed too, as well as we've been moving north. Some travel tips, excuse me, for folks is that pack clothes for all weather. We were amazed. We talked to some local folks that said that they had done this hike in 5 days instead of our 7 because it rained just torrential downpours the entire time, and they were just so miserable. They just kept on hiking just to get it done. We were just so fortunate. Be prepared for the hikes of the 7, 8, 9 days or more. And, so you got to train for it. Like I said, the boots are mission critical. And then also that baggage transfer service really was slick. That was just great for us to be able to use. The tick and midget repellent, and carry lots of water, because there's a lot of water around and you can filter it. It's best to just carry what you can fill in the morning. And as you can see, if the sun's shining, the scenery is beautiful for photographs as well. So here we are again. You're always crossing streams, and we're on the way to Kinlockleven. And it's interesting too, because Kinlockleven was actually, here we are, we're heading out on the way to Fort William. It really was not really spoken well of. There's a big abandoned aluminum smelter as you're walking in from early days. It was a little industrial town, but it's actually quite quaint. I felt that it was a nice destination and rather enjoyable little place to walk through. So the next morning we were up early after staying there. And today was the day we were going to be getting to Fort William. We're back down where there's some lochs that we could be walking by as well. Bit cloudier that morning. And then here's a sheep farm in the distance. You can see all the sheep out on the hillsides. You can see that there's some of the woods as well. Again, we were walking through either forest, clear cut, or pasture land like this for the day. And you can see again, they talk about the flash floods that they have, and you can really imagine just what it would be like. We actually did see some of the devastation or damage done by some very severe flooding that they had about 6 months before we came. Actually took bridges out and washed away some of the old homes as well. It must have been really something. but I could certainly see that if they had a few days of heavy rain, that you'd be needing these rocks to cross these areas. So then here we are. This is Ben Nevis, which is the highest peak on the islands of Great Britain and in Scotland. And so you could climb this one to the top as well if you wished. None of us did it, actually. We all had different directions we were going after we hit Fort William, but this is actually just Fort William's at the base of Ben Nevis. And it was fun too, finishing up, because you had several different ways that you could actually finish. There was several different trails of different varying lengths to get downtown. So that was nice. And another thing I would mention too is that for most of this trip, we had mountain bikes that would come by as well. There were mountain bike groups. And you're able to take mountain bikes on this trail as well for a lion's share of it. And then where you would have to deviate, where it's too rough, there would be roads that would not be too far off of the trail that you'd take for a period of, say, 20, 30 kilometers. So it's definitely definitely something that mountain bike people should really consider too, if that's what you enjoy doing. And at the trail's end, hey, there's the town down at the base of the bend or the mountain. And it was always nice to find a pub to have a pint at the end of the day. We certainly thoroughly enjoyed it. And as far as questions go, hey, if you have anything, just send in a note here now as well. If you'd like to see more pictures, Instagram's got a great West Highland Way that you can sign up for. And I enjoy just watching and clicking through and seeing what gets sent. And as far as guidebooks go, a couple that I would suggest, they're all called West Highland Way. One was by Charlie Lorem and Joel Newton. That's the one that we used, our group did. And then Lonely Planet's got a good one as well. You can log on, and I read over the years, I've read a number of stories about the West Highland Way also. And it's something you can find on Amazon, as you can imagine. So I'm open for questions, and is there anything further that people would wonder about as far as this trip? And isn't that amazing? Hard to believe, again, we had so much blue sky that it just, I can't, we joked about that. It rained before we started and it rained after we left, but there was no rain during. Actually, I got done, this went a little faster than I expected. I was expecting a few more questions as I went along. So, but I would say it was a couple days and it was windy. So that was something that we actually had to be prepared for because it was cool. And we were definitely dressed in layers because it was cool in the morning, but by noon it would be warm. And it was hunting season, so there were people that we'd see that would go off the trail to go hunting. Oh, and somebody asked, did anyone wear a kilt? Yes, actually, at least one of our group had a kilt on by the end of the 7 days or 7 nights. And then also we actually did meet a Scotsman, I think it was the first or second day in. And he was walking along the trail, and boy, he was dressed in his full kilt and the traditional Scottish wear. And so they definitely do wear them there. And we would run into occasional sheep on the trail as well. As far as the hotels go, yes, they just, just looking through my itinerary, we stayed at the Winnock Hotel in Dryman or Drummond, and then the Rowardannan Hotel that you saw in the picture. And then when we were in Inverarnan, it was the Ardui, Ardlui. And in Tyndrum, we stayed at just a little B&B that was actually quite nice. I don't have the name of that right offhand. And then the Kingshouse, which I had mentioned. And then in Kinlockleven, we stayed either at the Trail Race Inn or the McDonald Hotel. And so if you wish, feel free to send me any questions that you'd have on my email. I guess I didn't put it on the slide, but it's sweicht@comcast.net. That's sweicht@comcast.net. And I'll certainly welcome sending either the slide presentation itself and or answer your specific questions also. So it was fun. I would highly recommend it. It's totally different. I've hiked in the United States a bit, and I've hiked in New Zealand and other countries as well. And I would rank this right up at the top. This was both the people we met, the scenery, and just I guess I'd have to call them amenities. It's nice at the end of the day to actually have the ability to kick back and have a great dinner and a pint or a dram. If I were to do something again differently, I would say definitely, it was so disappointing that my boots, much that I thought they had been broken in, had to have a few blisters by the end of the trip. And actually, I wasn't the only one. Other people were having difficulty too. So I think that I would do that differently. I'd also be a little cautious too. I think I was extremely fortunate. We were fortunate not to have rain. And if we had had rain, even though I had rain pants and a rain jacket, I probably would have wanted to have a weatherproof pair of gloves, because it would have gotten cold in a hurry. And I think I would have probably not been prepared quite as much as I should have for cold weather. So I think that's something I would have done a little different. But otherwise, I think the distances we covered each day were very doable. And there were stops during the day that you could make as well. So it was really nice to, it was I would call it a leisurely walk. It wasn't something that you were really getting stressed about, that the sun was setting and you had to get somewhere. So that was the trip. Somebody was asking, have I done other multi-day hikes? And yes, I have. Normally a week, anywhere from 3 days to a week. And so I was comfortable with what I was getting into. Although I would say that I believe that a number of our group, within the 24, a number of them had not done hikes of this duration. And so it was a good learning curve as well. And we all finished. And we all finished with smiles on our face. And I would say that the way the trip was scheduled for those that wanted to do the 68 miles, it really worked out well. It was so seamless that you almost lost track of who was actually on the bus going a certain direction and who was on the trail, because a number of the nights we were all able to connect together. So it's really, I think, a very interesting way to go with a larger group that may have concerns about the actual length of the walk itself. I'd really recommend something like this for a group of friends. Somebody asked about a favorite scotch. Well, I'll tell you what, it's so funny. So one of the first days, I walked into a pub, or it was somewhere along the trail, and I walked up and says, "Well, do you have a Scotch menu?" And the woman in her heavy Scottish accent said, "Well, we don't have a Scotch menu here, but we certainly do have a whiskey menu if that's what you're looking for. We know where it comes from." And so I laughed at that one. There's different types of scotches, and coming from the different areas, the Highland, the Lowland, and the Isle of Insley, I believe it is. Some of them have a real peaty, dark, smoky smell and taste to them. Some of them are very light and a totally different color. So I'll tell you what, there's a wide range of them. And I would actually recommend, before you go on a trip like this, to actually go to a Scotch tasting. If you can find somebody locally here, and I know a number of people that do that over the years, it's really fascinating to actually know a little bit of what you're expecting to taste when you go there to taste the different whiskeys. It just really made the trip a little bit more special, knowing what we actually were sampling. And you could walk into a pub at night and there's always somebody local that's willing to tell you what the local whiskey is that they think is the best. Any other questions from folks? Well, with that, hey, I appreciate it. And feel free to contact me at sweicht@comcast.net if you have any questions. And it's great. Do enjoy, and let's hope we can all get out and do this again shortly. Thank you. I'm going to click stop sharing, and I welcome you to go to some of the other things that Midwest Mountaineering is doing. I just bought my new boots from Midwest here just recently, and I'm taking them out today, heading to the mountains tonight.